again, as we showed you with the R1000, all of the control we did with the R1000 was right here from the console. And you also have full control over all the M-48 personal mixers on your system right here from the console as well. And how you would achieve that is you hit the display button in the monitor section over to the right-hand side of the console. You hit the display, and then right underneath here you have function 8, which is M-48 Manager, and that will allow you to dive into each individual one. So that's how we get in the M-48 Manager. But the first thing that we have to do is decide what are the 40 common sources that we're going to send to the M-48. So remember that John in his presentation showed you that you can choose any 40 stems, if you will, from the console and send those to the personal mixing system. And the way that you do that is you go into the patch bay for the console, and the M-48s must exist on the REAC B output patch bay for the system. So these are always connected off of REAC B. And down the left-hand side of the patch bay screen, you can see all of the different sources. So any one of these sources can be patched to your M-48. So if you had a, say 8 or 12 choir mics, and you didn't want to patch all 12 choir mics directly to there, you could make an aux for those choir mics and just send that one aux to all the personal mixers and just make it easier to manage that way. But any matrix can be sent, as well as any channel direct, and that's how they're set up here at the sanctuary. Is we have the kick, the snare, each one of the individual inputs is being patched back to the corresponding output, and you can see the outputs across the top. And even if there are less physical outputs, so I know connected to here is a 1608 and it has 8 outputs, I can patch to all 40 locations that are here. So I have all the choices of channel directs, and then I can also patch in a talkback microphone. So if I have a talkback microphone plugged into the console, I can patch that in to the M-48 system, so I can speak from the front of house position to the musicians through the M-48s. And I can also do any of the preamps on the system directly to the M-48. So there might be a scenario where you have ambient mics in the room, as John said, and you don't need to bring those into the mix because you're never going to mix them into front of house. But you can patch those directly to the M-48s without needing them to be patched into the console. And you would do that simply by choosing the preamp that they're connected to, those mics are connected to, and patch them to your system that way. Another way that this is used is what type of patch point that you want for sending to your M-48s. So in the case where we're using channel directs, because that's how certainly 90% of the personal mixing systems are set up that we use, again, doing this one-to-one relationship, there is on each one of the channel displays, and I'm going to go back here, there is a direct out patch point, which is here. And you can see that this one is set for pre-EQ. I can go all the way down to pre-phase. So what this is really a true post-preamp split that I'm sending to the M-48s. I can do pre-fader, pre-EQ. I can do pre-fader, which is after the channel EQ. So if you want to have the channel EQ impact or affect what's going to the personal mixers, you would do it pre-fader. And then you can do post-fader. Almost never, ever, ever are you going to use post-fader, because if you change something in your front of house mix on your faders, that's going to affect the volume level going to the musician in the M-48. And you're going to be fighting each other, and they're not really going to be happy. The one difference between pre-phase and pre-EQ, which is important to know, is that pre-phase does not include any dynamics. So there's no compression, no gating, etc. that's applied to those sources. And a lot of drummers like the sources sent to them without any dynamics. They don't want the gate that you've put on the snare and everything. They want as much open kit as possible. So if you wanted to send the drum mics to the musicians without any dynamics processing, you do pre-phase. And of course, if you wanted dynamics, pre-EQ is a post-dynamics but before the EQ patch point. So that's some of the differences. So it's incredibly flexible as to what you can send to the M-48s. It's really up to you to decide which way that you want to do it. So that's how you choose which 40 sources you send to the M-48s. So let's go back to our M-48 Manager, and again, Monitor, and then M-48 Manager. And then once I'm in this screen, I can go through and choose any one of the M-48s on the system and work on editing it. So if I wanted to work on Sunny's personal mix here, what I would do is hit the first thing I'm going to do to identify which personal mixer I'm working on is I'm going to hit the Enter button. And there's a button here, F6. I would hit Blink LEDs, and now Sunny's personal mixer, which for the folks down on the side there can see right in front of you, one of the M48s is currently flashing. So I can identify which M48 that I'm working on. It makes it really fast when you're setting up to tell which M48 that you're working on. And of course, I can go in and I can name each one of the M48s. I can name it by position. I can name it by the person who uses it. It's really up to you how you want to structure your M48 setup. So let's cancel that. And then what we're going to do is go in and edit one of them. And I'm going to choose one of the other ones that we have on our system here. Actually, I'm going to choose Sunny's. I'm going to go into Setup. And when I go into Setup, you can see a very quick overview of what's happening in Sunny's personal mixer right now. So I have all of the individual groups that are here and that are set up. And then I have the overall source level mix that's happening. So the first thing that I would do typically is I would name all of these groups so that when I do my grouping of sources, I'm able to very quickly go in and decide what's happening there. So I don't know exactly what's assigned to group number 1 here, so I'm going to go into my source assigned screen, and I can see that group 1 is actually the kick. So I'm going to close this, I'm going to hit enter, and I'm just going to change this, hopefully pretty quickly, to say kick, and a C. And somewhere in here is the letter K. There it is, and we'll say OK. So now you can see that that group is named kick. That's on there. And I would go through and I would name each one of those groups so that as the engineer at the console, when I go in and look at Sunny's personal mixer, I can very quickly tell exactly what knob is affecting which. And as John pointed out, the ability that we have to be able to go into each personal mixer and set them up differently, I would want to change what this particular kick, I would want to know if this is a kick or if it's a lead vocal or what it is. So I can name each one of those groups there. Once I have all the groups named, I go into the source assignment screen. So if you're following along with your personal mixer and your screen, you can do this. We go into source assign. And this is where we're able to put all of the different instrument sources together. And Sunny has chosen to have his drum kit very, very spread out. So we have the kick here, we have the snare assigned to, you can call them groups or you can call them knobs. And some people prefer to refer to them as knobs because it makes it very easy to tell what is what. So we have the kick, we have the snare, we have the toms together, we have the overheads together. And when you have stereo sources, it's very nice to be able to put these onto the groups. And the groups are stereo groups. So you can put 1, 2, or as many sources there as you want. You can see we've got the keys left, we've got Sunny's guitar on 8, and then when I go to layer 9 to 16, I could see the rest of the sources and how they're grouped. So all the individual guitars. Fortunately, there's not a ton of sources here in the sanctuary, so very easy to get away with spreading everything out. But you can see that the background vocalist, Michael, Morgan, Beth Ann are all on group 13 here, and then some additional vocal mics are all grouped in these different areas. And then the lav, which I'd imagine is worn by the pastor, is over here on group 15. So very quickly able to group all of those together. Now, once you have the groupings done, you may have a situation where you've grouped all of the drums, for example, onto one knob. And what I'm going to do is just close this out here and see if I'm going to go into this leader one here, setup, and I'm going to change the way that this one is set up, and I'm going to put all the drums onto one knob here. So I'm going to go into the source assignment, and I'm going to change 1 through 8. Oh, okay, all of the drums are actually put onto group number 6, which is here. Now, hopefully we can do an experiment, John, where if I'm going to bring you up as engineer's monitor, and I could actually probably do it remotely, but we have a function called engineer's monitor, and what it allows me to do is instantly copy any of the M-48 personal mixer settings to one of the ones that's nominated as engineer's monitor, which John is working on right up there at the front. So I could have this right here at front of house, and I'd be able to listen in to any of the M-48s. So we have that coming back to us here on one of the faders, and I'm just going to test. So John, if you could solo group number 6. All right, so there we have all of the drums coming back. And what I'm going to do is go into the source level pan. So this is the next step. Once I've assigned all of the sources to a group, I now have a 40-channel mixer that I can adjust all of the levels. So if I wanted less kick, for example, I pulled out all the overheads, and now all I have is really the snare. Let's pull the kick back up. Some hi-hat. Then the overheads. And really, this is about what does that musician want that group mix to be. But you do have the ability to go in, and even though all of those drums are assigned to one knob, you can still edit that mix using this particular mixer that's built in here. And again, this is something you do during setup. This is something you do during rehearsal, so that once you get into the performance, you really just have that one knob that you're making adjustments to. But at any time that you want, you can simply signal the front of house guy and make some changes as well. So that's another way that you can do it. So, and you do also have the ability to do the panning that you can see here, so you can get a really nice stereo mix. And right now we're running it back mono, but we have overheads left and right, really hard pan, so we get a nice stereo mix that's in there. The other thing that you'll see on this screen, and I'll show you while we're here, is this aux on. So when John mentioned what is sent to the line outputs, as long as this is turned on, it will be sent to the main outs if you select the aux feed as what you're sending to the main out. So if I wanted a music minus me, and this was the worship leader, I would simply turn off the worship leader's vocal and their instruments so that the icons would be dark. So for example, just turn them off, and then that way their instruments are not going to come through that recording mix. All right, so that's how you set up the aux mix. And then to choose what you send to that line out, I'll just go to the Preferences tab, and you would choose the aux bus as what you send to the line out if you wanted to. All right, so that's how you set that guy up. So once you've done your main setup in the console, it's really over to the musician to be able to work with that particular mix. But at any time, there's a number of ways that I can help out the musician or rescue them if they happen to mix themselves into oblivion from time to time. So one way to do that is if I pull this back up. And you notice that as I go across, I am able to remotely control everything from the console for that musician. So if he says, hey, I'm not getting enough drums, I can now give him more drums remotely right from the console. And if John makes any changes on his side, I will see them reflected right here in the console. All right, and then one thing to really help you guys out from a front of house operator's perspective is if you have a musician that says, I really am not hearing my personal mixer, it's not loud enough, or my sound has gone really low, is on the top right-hand corner here, I have the readout of what the current settings are for the overall bass, treble, limiter, and volume for that personal mixer. So you can see the volume setting going to their headphones. The limiter setting here is cranked really, really high. That is probably what's impacting their volume more than anything else. Yeah. So yeah, if you're in your M-48 Manager on your page and you move your limiter knob, you will see it reflect on your screen. So that is one of the most common causes of low volume in the M-48 is they've just put too much limiting on their signals. That's a great way to be able to get them back. The other way to be able to help the musician out is through the memory locations. So I'm going to close out, because I don't have to do this individually. I can do it as a group. And I prefer to actually do it as a group, is I can go into the memory locations here and hit enter. And you can see that I have all 16 memory locations that are available here. So do here has been named as memory location 16 for Sunny's personal mixer. If I want to store just for Sunny's mixer, you can see I have selected unit here, and I would be able to store just by hitting the store button and write over memory location 16 for Sunny's personal mixer. But one of the best ways to help out a musician is if you saved the memory preset after a rehearsal or after a really good performance, is to be able to go back and you say, you know what, memory 8 is his default return to 0 sort of position, and just recall that memory setting and you will get them back to what they're normally used to hearing. Of course, they can do that right from their personal mixer, but you have the ability to remotely help one of those musicians as well. And it's a great thing to be able to do. And because I can do all units, a great best practice is you can store as you go through different songs. Maybe you have a scenario where you change the lead singer, or in the case of a church, your worship leader, and you've made changes to the personal mix. And maybe they do that in the same set of songs that that you're performing. You can actually have your different memory presets, one set up for the male worship leader and then one set up for the female worship leader. And again, the ability to tie that to scenes in the console. When you change scenes in the console, it will automatically change the memory presets in the M-48, and you automatically get that difference in mix set up for you. Another thing that you can do to preserve the integrity of the setups that you've done is prevent that musician from being able to save over any of the presets that are in the mixer. All right, so to do that, when you're inside any of the setup menus, so if we go into Sunny's here, and let's go to Preferences, and we can go Disable Recall button and Disable Store button. So if you don't want them to be able to store over any of the memory presets, you can disable the store, and then if you needed to, you could disable their ability to recall, but in most cases, you're not really going to need to be able to do that. So that's really quickly how you would set up M-48s. It does take a little bit of time at the beginning, but it's well worth it for the result that the musician gets on the back end. What we've done in this scenario is previously this one was set up for monitor. Let me go down and set up engineer's monitor, and I'm going to release him. All right, and you can see that I now have this M-48 has popped back up and called itself monitor. So whichever one I want to nominate as the engineer's monitor, you can see function button F6. I choose that personal mixer. I say set as engineer's monitor, and then it pops down, and now it's engineer's monitor. Now, whichever one of the other M-48s that I choose in this list, it will instantly copy over to be the settings from that personal mixer will instantly copy to the monitor. The last thing that you have to do is go into the engineer's monitor setup, and there's two options for this. One is if you just want to have a listening post and no ability to affect that other M-48, you would leave this checked. So if John were to move any of the knobs on there, it would not affect that musician's. However, if this is unchecked, then whatever changes John makes on the volume levels, panning, reverb, whatever, those will have an impact to that musician's directly. And this is honestly how it's used in the majority of cases. So John, you are now set up for the drums, and I'm going to go into the setup so you can see which channels are set up for him.
Good. So because you just have one monitor connected, you won't be able to do this. You need at least two to be able to mirror something. So as Christian said, we're now mirroring the drums settings. So I'm going to give you the sound, the feed of what the drum mix sounds like. Click is in there. You can see that's on number 16. So let's go to the screen of the M-48 on the overhead. So you can see 16 is there. Or I can solo the click, just hearing this. So you can hear this particular mix is very drum heavy. It's a lot of kick, a lot of snare, a lot of drums. Vocals are pulled back a little bit. He's got to be able to hear the click. Now, Christian, if you go and select the keys personal mix now on the engineer monitor. If we go back to the 480, you watch and you'll see this thing flash. So now it's flashed and it's instantly cloned the keys. Now the keys are really forward. And you notice if you go to the 480 screen, that you can see keys are now on 1 as opposed to kick. Kick is not on 1 anymore, keys are, and that's very dominant in the mix. If you switch back to drums, just for us to hear that. So you can hear a very different mix, very different arrangement, very different levels. And this is very handy for that monitor person, which is often, could be someone on the stage, or it could be a musical director. It could still be the front of house person helping out. In some places, they have one of these off to the side, and the music director can go over there and just tweak it a little bit if someone gets into trouble. So it's just a really great little example of how personal mixing is very personal in terms of what is needed from each musician.